Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about irritable bowel syndrome and some of the underlying causes that you should be looking into. So when someone has this, I always think about food allergies, sensitivities, and poor food digestion for one. Two, I think about small intestinal overgrowth of bacteria. Or three, imbalanced microbiome in the colon. Or an infection in the colon, such as an overgrowth of yeast, the presence of a pathogenic bacteria, a protozoan parasite, or a worm or something like that in the intestinal tract. So how do you kind of break into this and take a look? Well, with food allergies and sensitivities, there's not phenomenal testing about that to look into that, but you can do a blood test for IgG antibody titers against different food antigens. Like I have a panel I've used for 20 years or more, actually, through Meridian Valley Laboratory, and you're measuring antibodies against 100 different foods, and you can do an expanded panel that has like another 100 foods, and this gives you just like an idea. Like if you have certain foods that have really high antibody titers, you can try taking them out of your diet and seeing how you feel. There's some other types of allergy testing that's more sensitive, which is where you're measuring IgA antibodies in your stool. So there's some labs like InterroLab that does this, and they don't have huge panels of 100 foods, but you can at least get information about the most common food allergens like gluten, dairy, egg, and soy. And if you have elevated IgA antibodies to any one of those things, that can cause ongoing immune reactions when you eat those foods that can lead to intestinal inflammation, can blunt the microvilli that go into the intestinal tract to expand the absorptive surface. Those can get blunted off, reducing your ability to absorb your nutrients, and even reduces our ability to adequately digest food. So you end up getting more undigested food components going down the intestinal tract, which become a substrate for bacteria and yeast, and they often produce gas as a byproduct. So food allergies and food sensitivities are very important to identify. And of course, you can do the old-fashioned, just kind of modified elimination diet, where you modify your diet by taking out the most common allergens for a period of time, like avoid gluten, dairy, eggs, citrus is actually fairly common, soy, and of course, like preservatives and additives. And you eat a very clean, whole foods diet, for about 3 weeks, where you have either no grains or non-gluten grains, and clean proteins, whether plant-based or animal, and then lots of fruits and vegetables. And you eat that for about 3 weeks, and then you can see how you feel. And if you feel better, you can gradually, one at a time, one every 3 days or so, reintegrate foods and see your response. If you have a reaction, you should know it within 3 days. So then how do you look into the other two areas, whether you have a small bowel overgrowth or a microbiome imbalance in the colon? Well, in those two cases, you're really going to need to do some testing. So I tend to use breath testing for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So this is where you breathe into a tube, and then you actually collect the gases in your breath in the tube. Then you drink a solution that has some non-absorbable carbohydrate in it. And that will be a substrate for bacteria if bacteria are living in your small intestine. And the bacteria will produce either methane or hydrogen gas as a byproduct. So you can measure those gases in your breath. So you do an initial baseline breathing in the tube, you drink the solution, and then at 30, 60, 90, and 120 minutes later, you breathe in tubes again. and you're looking at the pattern of gas production in your breath. And if you have bacteria in your small intestine, you will see spikes up in the methane and hydrogen gas production. And if you have that, that needs to be treated. And that's almost an entirely different conversation about how you go about treating that. Because you also have to look at the kind of the root causes of why that developed in the first place. Do you have slow intestinal transit time from hypothyroidism? Do you have an infection in the enteric nervous system that's leading to reduced nerve impulses to the gut that's slowing down your intestinal transit? There's just a lot to think about. But you can treat it and get over it, and it can bring people an incredible amount of relief. Okay, so then the microbiome in the colon, the best testing nowadays, in my opinion, is gene mapping. And we used to culture the stool and see what cultured out, and it just wasn't as accurate. So now we can do gene mapping of the microbiome and take a look at whether you have any of the classic pathogens in the intestinal tract, or whether you just have overgrowths of opportunistic bacteria, or bacteria that are known to trigger autoimmune diseases, or an overgrowth of yeast, or protozoan parasites, or amoebas, or worms, or even viruses, enteric viruses that can create problems. And then in this kind of testing, you can also learn if you have H. pylori, which is an ulcer-causing type of bacteria that lives more in the stomach or small intestine, but can cause problems all the way down your enteric tract. So it's very good information you can get from a gene mapping test. And you can find out what specifically needs to be treated. So my advice is, if you don't have to suffer with intestinal disharmony, actually, you should not have any at all. Like people used to say, it's normal to fart 12 times a day or something like that. And actually, that's common, but that's not ideal. You shouldn't at all. So if you are producing gas, it's because there's the wrong ratios of microorganisms in your colon, or bacteria that shouldn't be living in your small intestine, or you're eating foods that are not getting digested very well, or eating foods that are triggering an immune reaction. So if you can sleuth these things out and identify these and eliminate them, you should have harmonious functioning of your gastrointestinal tract, and you don't need to live with discomfort.